In the quiet moments before everything changes, Morgan Grant thought she had her life figured out. She had lived through the ordinary milestones: love, marriage, and motherhood. Yet, she never imagined how one phone call could shatter everything she thought she knew. A single decision, a sudden loss, it would fracture the heart of her family, forcing her to confront truths she had spent years hiding: a daughter's resentment, a mother's regret. Morgan Grant had always believed she was doing the right thing. She married young, had a child early, and put her own ambitions aside for the sake of family. She did what was expected. She didn't complain. But as she looked back on her life, she began to feel the weight of the choices she'd made. Her 16-year-old daughter, Clara, couldn't have been more different. Clara was determined to avoid the mistakes her mother had made. She dreamed of a future that was hers to shape, one where she wouldn't be burdened by the responsibilities of marriage or by the tight grip of the past. But life, as it often does, has its own plans. A single tragedy, sudden and devastating, would change everything for both Morgan and Clara. In that moment, the world as they knew it crumbled, leaving them lost in the aftermath. The accident tore through their lives, leaving destruction in its wake. But it wasn't just the physical damage that would take time to heal. It was the emotional wreckage. Morgan had spent so much of her life trying to protect Clara from hardship, but now she realized that she had built a wall between them, a wall made of silence, of unsaid words, of sacrifices that had gone unappreciated. Clara, on the other hand, felt the weight of her own anger. She had always kept her distance from her mother's life, afraid of becoming like her, tied down, invisible, trapped. But now, she couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape her mother's regrets, nor could she ignore the growing distance between them. Each day, Clara found herself facing a new reality. She had to learn to navigate the grief that consumed her, while also confronting the truth about her family's past, the secrets her mother had kept hidden, secrets that no longer stayed buried. The tension between them grew. There were words left unsaid, actions left undone. They both knew that something had to change, but neither knew how to begin. The once clear lines between mother and daughter began to blur, and in the confusion, they both found themselves questioning everything. As time passed, the weight of their loss began to reveal unexpected truths. Morgan, who had always believed that keeping the past hidden was for the best, found herself forced to confront the very things she had been avoiding. She had spent her life trying to shield Clara from the pain of the past, but in doing so, she had robbed Clara of the chance to understand her mother as a person, not just a parent. Clara, too, began to see things differently. She had spent so much of her life resenting her mother's choices, but now she understood the root of those decisions. They weren't just mistakes, they were lessons in love, sacrifice, and survival. In the midst of the pain, they began to rebuild, slowly, quietly. The barriers between them began to crack, revealing glimpses of the bond they had always shared. They weren't the same people they had been before the tragedy, but they could still learn to move forward together. For the first time, Morgan and Clara began to see each other as equals, both shaped by the past, but not bound by it. The grief they carried was heavy, but it no longer defined them. The day came when Morgan and Clara could no longer ignore what was between them. The weight of everything they had lost, everything they had failed to say, hung heavily in the air. Morgan stood before Clara, her heart in pieces, but her resolve stronger than ever. She spoke not just as a mother, but as a woman who had lived through years of regret for the things she had done, and the things she hadn't. Clara, standing there, her own heart torn between anger and understanding, realized that her mother was more than the person who had made mistakes. She was a woman who had loved deeply, even if she had loved imperfectly. The silence between them stretched on, but in that silence, there was a shift. A quiet understanding. They didn't need perfect answers or promises of easy resolutions. They simply needed each other. The pain wouldn't go away overnight, but in that moment, they found a small measure of peace. They knew they could move forward, even if they didn't know exactly where the road would lead. Days passed in a blur of both grief and healing. Morgan found herself writing, pouring out the words she had long held inside, finally facing the truths she had spent years hiding. She no longer feared the secrets of the past, for they had already come to light. Clara, too, began to see her mother in a new light. She saw the woman behind the parent, the person who had made sacrifices, fought battles, and lost more than she had ever let on. They were no longer mother and daughter in the same way. Now, they were two people, each struggling to navigate the aftermath of a life that had been turned upside down. The distance between them began to close, not with grand gestures, but with small, everyday acts of love. Morgan understood that she could no longer live for the past, and Clara understood that she could no longer avoid the truth of her mother's life. Together, they found a way forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. What is left when everything has been lost? What remains when the past is full of mistakes, and the future is clouded with doubt? Regretting You teaches that the most important thing in life is not how we avoid pain, but how we face it. Morgan and Clara learned that it's not enough to simply survive. They had to choose to live, to embrace the broken parts of their lives and turn them into something beautiful. Grief, regret, and pain are all a part of being human. But the true measure of strength is how we heal, how we love, and how we forgive. In the end, it was not the perfect moments that defined them, but the imperfect ones, the moments of vulnerability, of openness, of learning to trust again. Regretting You is not just a story of loss. It's a story of rediscovery, of finding hope in the places where we least expect it.